This is a story about a British millionaire and his American wife and their adventures in the art trade. It's about a gallery that baffled the British and seduced and amazed everyone else. It's about collectors and dealers, galleries and museums, and a decade in art when it was hard to tell the difference between them. It's a story that began 12 years ago in a New York studio.
Well, I first met Charles, I guess 1978. He and Doris came over with Mary Boone to look at a painting called Akatoni. The two of them were very much in partnership, I would say, in their aesthetic judgment. I mean, they were doing this together. I mean, they didn't say a lot. They just said that they thought it was very beautiful or something like that. And yes, I knew that they were collectors, and I knew that he was very enthusiastic, and that they were, you know, they wanted to put together a large collection.
Charles and Doris Saatchi began forming their collection in 1970. Schnabel was just the first of a group of neo-expressionists whose work they brought in depth in the early 80s, including Europeans Francesco Clementi, Sandro Chier and Georg Baselitz. Prior to this buying spree, the Saatchis had focused on American minimalism. Artists like Sol LeWitt, Donald Judd, Bryce Marden, Bruce Nauman. Many of them bought from Leo Castelli, New York's most prestigious dealer. Castelli still shows Bruce Nauman. For a brief moment in the early 80s, he also showed Julian Schnabel, the first younger artist the gallery had taken on in over 10 years, due in large part to Saatchi's enthusiasm.
I would say that Saatchi was unique at that time. He appeared suddenly upon the scene, buying massively and buying well, picking the best artists around. So that was an extraordinary phenomenon. We were all absolutely bowled over by this man suddenly appearing and doing what he was doing. And of course, he had a great influence on the market. When somebody is around that buys so massively, then of course prices of these artists tend to go up. So his influence was very profound on the market, obviously.
He was this fantastic creature. He was very positive as a force. He, you know, just for the artists and for the galleries, he was building up prices. He was making people more sensational in the sense that suddenly they were in the limelight with him, whoever it might be, whether it was Schnabel or Clemente or Chier, the whole range of people who were part of the new figurative movement and the expressionist movement. That was Saatchi and his gang.
I mean, I think he changed my life a lot. I mean, his buying my paintings, it kind of gave me the privilege to continue working, to, you know, to have enough money to buy some more painting, some more paint and canvas, and we became friends. I felt like he was very, very supportive of my work, and he always seemed kind of shy, and he wasn't really friends with a lot of artists, and I'm not friends with a lot of collectors, but I liked him, and I think he liked me. I mean, he had 30 paintings of mine, something like that.
But it was his possession of so many Schnabels that led to Saatchi's first confrontation with the British art world.
The Tate wanted to show Schnabel. Charles had a lot of work, and it became possible to do this show because the work wouldn't have to be brought to the Tate from all over the world. It was in London, and the show could be mounted. Charles didn't lend all the work. I know I lent something, and from what I can remember, Julian lent work as well. But Charles lent the bulk of the work.
On the one hand, the British critics hated the art. you know, because they were thinking about their own local problems, you know, which was no interest to the rest of the world. But I mean, anyway, those are the local problems here. And they wanted to hate Schnabel. And as Saatchi was this kind of mythic man who got Mrs. Thatcher elected to her high office, I mean, the whole thing was just too good to be true and became a kind of, another kind of cause célèbre.
Mrs. Thatcher was at a very low ebb in popularity. She was considered one of the most unpopular prime ministers, I think, ever. And there was an awful lot of talk about how the advertising agency had manipulated the public into a sense of accepting something that in fact had backfired on them. And now the focus was turning slightly towards art, and I think that the impression was that they were being manipulated by Charles's amassment of an artist, that he had somehow persuaded the Tate to show.
We're talking about, if you like, the old guard British art establishment who had a comfortable local situation from the post-war years right the way through until maybe even the end of the 70s. There was very little general recognition that the art world was bigger than, you know, London and the London personalities.
A paint warehouse in North London offered the Saatchis a solution to the problem of an art world that was frightened of change. The site became the Saatchis' own gallery, where they would show their own private collection. It was open to the public, but there were no trimmings, no sign over the door, no advertising, no exterior glamour. In fact, barely any exterior at all. Saatchi's Boundary Road space was unprecedented here. It was a hyper-exaggeration of an art gallery ideal that simply didn't exist in the British imagination. The gallery opened in 1985 with an unlikely but widely acclaimed juxtaposition of Warhol and minimalism.
I think that he really did a lot for London to build a place like that, to show this work, where somebody could walk and really see what modern art was like.
Each successive show, together with the Saatchis' four-part catalogue, illustrating the by now vast range and depth of the collection, seemed to win the Saatchis the grudging respect of the British art establishment.
This barrier of suspicion about modernism in this country has to a great extent been overcome, and I think that the Boundary Road Gallery has contributed to a great extent towards that change of feeling.
But in 1987, Saatchi's reputation ran aground again with his New York Art Now show. This was the display of his recently acquired holdings in the art movement that by the mid-80s had pushed aside neo-expressionism, a wave of young New Yorkers playing games with meaning and objecthood.
They were selling in New York amazingly well. Nobody, in a sense, knew where these people came from. Suddenly they were pasting Formica over everything and looking a little bit like a lot of other people, but capturing something that was after Duchamp. It was conceptual, but it was really hip. And Saatchi was that too, wasn't he, in a sense? He was conceptual and hip. He came in and was conceptualizing a whole time, buying the way that he bought. And he was the catalyst for that.
Works in the show by Tishan Su, Philip Taff and Peter Schoof were bought by Saatchi from dealer Pat Hearn.
I think what made him different was that he had a project. He had a very specific project. And there was a goal and there was a date. And he invited this group of people to participate in this project. It was a very clean kind of packaging. I would get telephone calls from him on the airplane. I felt as though, you know, I would call him and they would put me through immediately to him. He sort of agreed to almost any kind of situation that I would set up in terms of combinations of pieces that I thought were the best.
He's a very impetuous and enthusiastic person who is motivated by, or seems to be motivated by, decisions which he makes very quickly. And then he sorts out the consequences. And sometimes the consequences are very good, sometimes they're very bad.
British critics hated the show. All the old prejudice and phobias were revived. They accused Saatchi of jumping on the latest art world bandwagon. But was he using his gallery to hype the careers of shallow arrivistes, as they said, or was he again a jump ahead of everyone else, merely testing the new movement?
He regards himself as a private person rather than a public person, and therefore having essentially responsibilities that are those of a private person rather than those of a public person. That means that he doesn't feel any need to explain himself. He doesn't feel any need to be consistent. He doesn't feel any need to justify what he's doing, even if he changes his mind. I mean, he works in a profession where if you don't change your mind and if you don't move forward all the time, you're lost.
Back in 1985, Saatchi had changed his mind about Sandro Keir, disposing of all the Keirs in his collection. A mildly shocked New York art world claimed this move alone had caused a temporary downturn in Keir's prices. The millionaire who makes an artist can also break him. But after the Neo Geo show, rumours began spreading in New York. Charles Saatchi was selling again, but this time in a big way.
I was getting phone calls literally at 11 o'clock at night from people saying, "Did you hear what Charles Saatchi has done?" And all sorts of rumors coming in. It was 20 works, it was 40 works. Now, at least we know that there are 60 to 70 works valued at up to $30 million, perhaps that's even conservative. That he was selling off whole chunks of his collection, perhaps 10-15% of the collection, which is sizable. And the feeling was that it was terrible, it was a disaster, it was betrayal. Dealers resented it in New York because he had made it felt like a promise, it was trust. He was going to keep everyone's work together and encapsulate that moment. And suddenly there was talk that because he was having financial difficulties that he needed to get money quickly, and he was just selling it all off.
I heard that there were some pieces that he was beginning to sell, and I didn't hear that he was selling the work of the artists that I show, but I called to try to find out and also to offer a price for the works, because I would be very happy to have them back. Those people that I mentioned, there are collectors that would be very interested in having those pieces because, in fact, as I said before, I really selected the best works of theirs. So I suppose what became frustrating was when I was trying to find out if he was selling the work and I was not able to get that information.
All of that resentment was, I think, on the part of the dealers that he wasn't going to sell it back to them. He was going to sell it through this character, Gagosian.
Larry Gagosian is a secondary market dealer, a middleman who never deals directly with artists, but only with artworks when they come up for resale.
Well, I was offered quite a lot of works, different works from different artists, and that was it, and I purchased what I thought was good to purchase.
Art of our time turned out to be a mail-order catalog. Basically, just look in the book, pick one that you like, and you can get it if you've got enough dough.
It was very shrewdly done, the lesser works, and then the more important ones all of a sudden became available. I kept one work that I purchased, the Meistersinger, and which I'm very happy to keep. Mrs. Saatchi bought it in 1982 for, like, I would guess, like $65,000. And it was sold for about $1 million in 88 or 89, which is quite an increase.
I don't really know what happened to Charles Saatchi. Doris and Charles are not together anymore. And I don't know how much that has to do with what's happened to the collection, but what happened is once he sold Akatoni and the divan painting, paintings that were key paintings to this group, I realized that he was not going to put on an exhibition of my work, because it wasn't about pruning things. You just are not going to get paintings like those paintings again, whether they're good or bad. They're just the only ones there are.
I understand perfectly well an artist's point of view in this case, and they're not happy about it, but they then tend to forget that it was partly because of Saatchi, especially the new figuration and the figurative art in the 80s that he was buying a lot of, that made that art very in demand, and a lot of American collectors followed Saatchi when buying these artists. So I think there is gratitude and ingratitude.
Basically, everyone said, how could he? He's misled us. Well, he couldn't have misled most of them, because most of the collecting was, on a serious level, in my view, it was done before 85. He didn't know he was going to open the museum. He never stated to me at any stage that he wouldn't sell works. There are many American collectors who have sold a far higher percentage of the collection than him.
This brash guy who came in and bought everything up has had 10 years to think about it. And now his eye is more mature, and he just wants to keep the best.
Collectors always sell. It's impossible to put together a large collection of contemporary art without either making mistakes or overbuying or wanting to shift the emphasis slightly from one thing to another.
They're great paintings of many different artists that are key paintings. Pruning, is he pruning the polka paintings? I mean, he sold the best polka paintings that he had. Is he pruning the Kiefer paintings? I mean, if he's pruning, he must be doing it blindfolded.
It's now March 1990, and the exhibition that opened a week ago at Boundary Road again mixes painting with sculpture, older artists with younger ones. But this time the art favoured by the New York art world is nowhere to be seen. These days, Saatchi exhibitions are British to the core. This one shows new British sculpture by Richard Deacon and more traditional London school painting from Lucian Freud and Frank Auerbach.
His taste in the London school and Lucian Freud and Auerbach also represents his own maturity. Nobody knows where a collector's eye will go as he or she gets older. And his eye seems to be going inward in the sense that it's to home turf again.
Maybe he wants to get a little bit more, or find some credibility, or find... So, I mean, it's very easy to, point at the Americans always and say, oh, those vulgar Americans. Let's have some classic English art here.
I think it's quite interesting that he's decided to show British art in a rather nationalist way. That is to say, he's showing British art in a series of shows that are devoted exclusively to British art. He's not mixing British art with European or American. That I find actually slightly worrying, because I wonder what it is that he's trying to identify in British art which is so particular. It also, I think, gives people a feeling that maybe this is just the Saatchi flavour of the month, rather than a serious commitment to British art as part of a dialogue within the art world.
I think he certainly seems to be completely committed to the British artists that he's buying. I think it shows British art as being not British art, as being international art. I think Charles has helped to take the smallness out of British art, take the insularity out of British art and put it in the world, which is where it should be.
This is a story that turns out not to have an ending. However the collection develops, in the face of Charles Saatchi's silence, everyone will go on looking for links between the world of art and the corporate mind, the drive to make everything sellable. Maybe it was more personal all along. Charles and Doris split up, and the grand obsession with the New York art scene just wasn't there anymore. For New York galleries, that meant the hangover after the champagne. But New York has its own brand of provincialism, and for everyone else, it was just a storm in a teacup.
People sort of look at the collecting of the Medicis or Louis XV, and they sort of make all these kind of value judgments about their taste and so on and so forth. And I'm sure you can make lots of interesting value judgments about Charles and why he's buying and whether it's to do with power and all this kind of thing. And I mean, all that's fine. And of course, you know, collecting and power and wealth have always gone together. There's nothing new about that. Artists and the art world can't have their cake and eat it. I mean, I think we should be incredibly happy that there has been a Charles Saatchi who is prepared to put, you know, his money where his eyes are.
Every time we say goodbye.
I think if you asked me, would it be better if Charles Saatchi ever lived or not? Would the art world be better if he didn't exist? I would have to say that I would miss him if he wasn't there.